NATO intelligence rains bombs on Crimea. Putin's defiant last stands as Doomsday looms. The Ukrainian battlefield, a construction site of carnage. Russia suppressed in the heartland of Europe. Asia Pacific nations rally to Ukraine's aid. With Ukrainian artillery relentlessly pounding on the Crimean bridge and Russia's advanced warplanes destroyed in Ukraine's airspace, Russia's once envisioned glory now appears bleak. In the high-stakes competition against the entire Western world, Putin has backed himself into a corner with no way out. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This marked the beginning of the war that swept across the European continent. After more than a year of intense fighting, both sides found themselves in a deadlock along this 1,000-mile-long front line. While Russian forces managed to capture strategic locations like Avdiivka, their advance pales in comparison to the Soviet Union's counter-offensive against Nazi Germany during World War II. Nowadays, it is common for combat to occur within a close range of 100 meters, but despite this intense fighting, the front line remains deadlocked with no side gaining a clear advantage. Supported by Western military aid, the Ukrainian army has managed to withstand the attack. They have traded space for time and stabilized their defense lines. At the same time, Ukrainian forces have actively studied Russian tactics and constructed their own versions of the Surovikin line of defense. They employed landmines, dragon's teeth, drones, and other means to prepare themselves for a potential large-scale Russian attack in the springtime. Satellite imagery reveals excavators everywhere on Ukrainian position west of Avdiivka, with trenches crisscrossing the landscape like a vast construction site. The building of these fortifications signifies that the Ukrainian military is prepared for an extended war. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has evolved into a battle of endurance, and only time will reveal the profound impact it will have on Europe and the global stage. Despite losing Avdiivka, Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi successfully withdrew the bulk of his forces to the second line of defense, thus avoiding greater losses. This decision earned him the trust of his troops and dispelled previous concerns about his hold-the-line-at-all-cost approach. Through this battle, Syrskyi solidified his position as Ukrainian's top commander. The soldiers believe that Syrskyi will not let their sacrifice be in vain. This sense of trust has boosted the Ukrainian military's confidence in future operations. In terms of artillery firepower, Russia's advantage may soon be eroded. The Czech Republic has revealed that the $1.5 billion needed to fund Ukraine's 800,000 rounds of artillery ammunition are now in place. The first batch of ammunition, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, will arrive in Ukraine within weeks. This will be sufficient to meet the Ukrainian army's demand for 155mm artillery shell for 1 month. Currently, Ukraine's monthly shell consumption has dropped below 60,000. The source of these shells remain anonymous and is clearly not among EU countries. At least 300,000 of them were 122mm Soviet-made artillery shells. Russia is also trying to establish the origin of the ammunition. It is worth noting that European countries raised this required $1.5 billion in just 18 days. In the midst of the unfolding tragedy in Ukraine, the only beam of comfort emerges from the fact that since the start of 2024, Ukrainian forces have successfully shot down 18 Russian warplanes, including 15 Su-34s and 2 Su-35s. This achievement has temporarily halted Russia's use of tactical aviation bombs, greatly alleviating the pressure on Ukrainian troops. Notably, since February 17th, one or more high-performance Russian aircrafts like the Su-34 and Su-35 and A-50 have been shot down almost daily. The loss of Su-34 bombers have been particularly impactful. Without these planes, the Russian military cannot effectively breach Ukraine's defenses. The Russian aerospace forces have grown exceedingly reliant on the Su-34 for delivering aerial bombs. This very modern frontline bomber doubles as a fighter, but there are currently less than 80 in service. If the rate of Su-34 aircraft losses persist over the next 1.5 or to 2 months, the Russian aerospace forces will see a complete depletion of this aircraft type in less than 4 months. Although the Su-24, Su-27, and Su-30 can replace the Su-34's functions to some extent, they are poorer in performance and characteristics, making them more vulnerable to destruction. Moreover, once the Su-24, Su-25, and Su-27 are lost, they can no longer be produced. In particular, the Su-25's ability to support ground troops is irreplaceable by other fighters. The Kyiv Independent reports that within just over 10 days, 13 to 14 of Russia's most advanced warplanes were shot down. This is because Ukrainian and Allied technicians have carefully studied the wreckage and fragments of several Russian aircrafts for over a year. Thus, they have discovered ways to penetrate Russian avionics and electronic defense systems. Austrian aerial warfare analyst Tom Cooper stated that early in the war, Ukraine had acquired an Su-34, which the US National Air and Space Intelligence Center studied and developed countermeasures for. Ukrainian and American engineers mastered the secrets of Russian warplane electronics defense systems, after which Ukraine adjusted its air defense tactics accordingly. They understand when Russian pilots can detect incoming missiles, how electronics warfare pods identify missiles, how radar deceive missiles, and more. They even learned the search frequencies of Russian radar warning equipment and thus had Ukrainian forces attack Russian aircraft using other frequencies. Currently, 3 major areas in Ukrainian airspace pose a threat to the Russian aerospace forces. These areas include the Patriot Protection Zone over major cities like Kyiv and the 25-kilometer long protection zone on the left bank of the Dnieper River, and the newest battlefield interception zone. Today, various Russian aircraft models are at risk throughout the temporarily occupied areas and even farther afield. Considering that many Russian models can no longer be produced, their potential and ability to cover and support ground operations will continue to decline. This fundamentally alters the balance of power between the armed forces of Ukraine and Russia. As Russia temporarily loses air dominance, its westward advance has been met with fierce assaults from Ukrainian armed helicopters, resulting in heavy casualties. There are signs that Russian troops' losses have reached unsustainable levels. Apart from suppressing domestic opposition to fill its ranks, Russia has been actively recruiting foreign fighters to strengthen its forces. Not long ago, a group of Indians shared a video online urgently seeking assistance. These 7 men alleged that they were deceived into traveling to Belarus under the guise of tourism, but were forcibly redirected to Russia upon arrival. Once in Russia, they were compelled to undergo 15 days of basic military training before being deployed to the front lines in Ukraine. They are begging the Indian government to rescue them, as they did not come to fight. Just last year, the Indian government saved a group of similarly deceived laborers from being forced into the Russian army. Now that the Russians are targeting Indians again, it suggests they lack manpower severely, to the point where they will take whoever they can get a hold of. During an interview with Russian media, the appointed governor of the occupied Zaporizhia region, who has been endorsed by Putin, declared that they would refuse to release any Ukrainian prisoners of war. Instead, these prisoners of war will be subjected to forced labor and dispatched into the battlefield to combat their fellow countrymen. This announcement has startled Europe. As the election approaches, Putin's behavior is growing more erratic. The Russian military now faces a shortage of Ukrainian prisoners of war for potential prisoner exchanges. However, the Russian military has not been entirely without gains in recent battles. At least 2 American-made M1 tanks have been destroyed, and a suspected HIMARS rocket launcher has been hit. If confirmed, this will be the first recorded instance of Russia destroying a HIMARS rocket launcher in 2 years. Originally, the Russian military had hoped to continue its offensive before the arrival of the 2024 spring Rasputisa season, which is the mud season that makes traveling difficult. They aim to leverage their current numerical superiority to increase their gains and apply strategic pressures on Ukraine. However, that opportunity now appears distant. Other reports indicate that during a parliamentary debate on February 28th, Singaporean Defense Minister Ng Hen revealed that the United States used F-35s to locate and identify Russian surface-to-air missiles based in Ukraine. The US then shared this information with NATO countries. Reportedly, the primary role of the F-35 in the Ukraine conflict has been intelligence gathering. The radar of this aircraft can operate for extended periods without being easily detected by Russian electronics warfare equipment. This implies that even the highly praised S-500 air defense system and other Russian air defense and electronic warfare equipment are unable to defeat the F-35. For the Putin administration, whether the F-35 has already intervened in the Ukraine conflict remains a pressing question to be answered. If the F-35 has indeed participated in the war without the Russian military's knowledge, it exposes significant flaws in the Russian air defense system. Conversely, even if the F-35 has not yet taken part in the conflict, the Russian military must still seriously reflect on why its air defense system is defenseless against certain US equipment. Faced with various humiliations, Russian President Putin delivered a stern State of the Nation message on February 29th. He bluntly stated that Russia's strategic nuclear forces are now prepared for full combat and warned that Western threats are escalating the risk of nuclear war. The implication of these remarks is that Russia does not rule out using nuclear weapons in response to NATO intervention. Russia possesses the world's largest number of nuclear warheads, but this does not mean they can act without consequences. Western countries also have substantial nuclear arms with more diverse and advanced delivery methods. Moreover, the outstanding performance of the Patriot air defense system has greatly boosted the confidence of Western nations. It is proven that Russia's secret missiles are not as advanced as presumed. Russia's previously much hyped hypersonic missiles such as the Zircon and Kinzhal have performed poorly. The performance of its supposedly advanced aircraft is even worse in comparison. On February 29th, the Su-57 fighter jet, touted as the world's most advanced, entered the eastern Ukraine region alongside two Su-35s to carry out a bombing mission. Due to technical malfunctions, neither of the two missiles launched by the Su-57 hit their targets and instead crashed in a field. The Su-57 has always been promoted by the Russian aerospace forces as being on par with the US Air Force's F-22 aircraft, yet its combat deployment required escort from other lower-tier fighters, and still the mission ended in failure. This makes it impossible to say that Su-57 is comparable to the F-22, and this so-called most advanced fighter jet is likely just another deceiver. With such humiliating military capabilities, even if Putin resorts to threatening with nuclear weapons, NATO is unlikely to back down easily. The Ukrainian military has declared that their goal this year is to completely destroy the Crimean Bridge, which they consider an illegal structure. On March 1st, the Ukrainian Air Force deployed 6 Su-24M bombers and 3 MiG-29 fighters to launch airstrikes on Crimea. This was done under the command of a NATO RQ-4 Global Hawk resonance drone and a P-8A Poseidon anti-submarine patrol aircraft. Prior to the air raid, the RQ-4 resonance drone detected the location information of relevant targets in Crimea. Subsequently, under the command of the Pa-8 anti-submarine patrol aircraft, the first wave of attacks commenced at 2 p.m. Ukrainian MiG-29 fighters first launched several AMD-160 MALD decoy missiles provided by the United States. This successfully caused the Russian air defense system to reveal its position as they launched missiles in return. The aim was to probe the Russian air defense network near the Crimean Bridge. In the second wave of attacks, Su-24M bombers fired a dozen Storm Shadow missiles, also called Scalp-EG cruise missiles, at the relevant targets. According to the reports, the Russian military shot down 12 missiles or air-launched decoys, but it remains unclear whether the Crimean Bridge was effectively hit. Affected by the air raid, the Crimean Bridge was briefly closed. the Russian military also deployed a large number of smoke grenades in the area, which disrupted road traffic in Crimea. From the current situation, it appears that the Russian military was powerless to retaliate against the Ukrainian Air Force strike that was under NATO command. Throughout the strike process, the Ukrainian Air Force's actions were very smooth and were carried out according to the standard suppression of enemy air defense procedure known as SEAD. NATO's command demonstrated remarkable professionalism, significantly boosting the effectiveness of the Ukraine Air Force strike with the deployment of only 2 aircrafts. The Russian military seems to have lost confidence in this bridge. Currently, most of the supplies supporting the southern front need to be transported by ferry, while Russia is also accelerating the construction of a new railway bridge. The more Russia uses nuclear weapons as a threat, the more indicates that it has exhausted all options and is left with only this well-known trump card. Previous secret weapons such as energy weapons, hypersonic missiles, and food blockades have all been debunked one by one. Today, although Russia holds this last trump card, they dare not play it lightly. Russian leaders do not genuinely want to engage in direct combat with NATO, as it contradicts their interest. Numerous high-ranking officials have family members residing in Western nations. Do they truly possess the resolve to initiate a conflict? With each confrontation, Russia's boundaries are disregarded, and global backing for Ukraine has become more apparent. Once reinforcements and supplies reach Ukraine, the war dynamics will once more alter. Will NATO proceed to deploy troops in Ukraine? While some red lines may appear daunting to cross, they are often fragile and easily surpassed. Upon breach, the consequences may not entail a nuclear bomb, but rather the crossing of another red line. Currently, NATO is not only focused on the European continent, but is also gazing upon the Asia-Pacific region. NATO is strengthening its cooperation with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Any country joining NATO would pose a significant threat to the regional situation. It seems that 1.6 trillion US dollars in military spending might not be enough to counter the potential threat now. Considering the present circumstances, Putin's position appears precarious. On the Ukrainian front, the Russian military faces successive retreats, undermining the perception of their advanced weaponry and equipment. It also highlights the widening disparity between their capabilities and those of NATO. These battlefield setbacks not only diminish Putin's international standing, but also threatens his domestic authority. At the same time, NATO's power continues to expand as they extend their partners from those in Europe to those in Asia Pacific. Once NATO takes root in Asia, it will undoubtedly pose a greater strategic threat to Russia. Faced with troubles domestically and abroad, it seems that Putin has reached a dead end. Frequently bringing up the nuclear weapons threat only exposes Putin's helplessness and vulnerability. The more he threatens the world with a nuclear war, the more it shows that he has no other bargaining chips. The true interest of the Russian high-ranking officials may not necessarily lie in perishing together with the West. Depictions of Russian military might symbolized by landmarks like the Crimean Bridge, Russian warplanes, and air defense systems are crumbling beneath the shadows of war. The Russian glory that Putin once portrayed now seems elusive. As Ukraine's counter-offensive gains momentum and NATO's military preparations intensify, Putin's downfall may be imminent. In a high-stakes showdown against the entire Western world, Putin risks losing everything through his own efforts. Instead of bringing prosperity, he brings forth the flames of war and devastation to Russia and the world. While Putin may have aspired to emulate the strength of figures like Peter the Great, history may ultimately judge him as a symbol of ambition, shamed and condemned. Despite his attentions to review Russia, Putin's action may only hasten the decline of the country. The last sentence reported by TASS Russian news agency might just be the true reflection of Putin. He came as a mystery, he left as a mystery. This war, out of sync with the times, will ultimately end with the conclusion of the Putin era, the era that draws its curtain amidst the smoke of battle, leaving behind a lesson and a sigh for the world.